"You're always complaining about being cold," my mother-in-law remarked, her tone tinged with irritation. "So I went ahead and set up a bonfire in the yard for you. Go on, warm yourself up out there before you turn into an icicle." She gestured towards the backyard, visible through the window. Curious, I followed her pointing finger, only to be met with a sight that filled me with despair. "My name is Rosetta. I'm 27 years old, a working housewife who juggles part-time shifts at a nearby supermarket. My husband Andy is 29, 2 years my senior, and works in an office. Together, we have a 1-year-old son named Daniel. Around a year before Daniel was born, we made the decision to move in with Andy's family. With his father's passing before our marriage and his mother living alone, it made sense financially to share a home and save money for our child. However, since then, the subtle jabs from my mother-in-law have only increased. After giving birth, I took a step back from my job to focus on Daniel. However, my mother-in-law wasn't pleased. 'I can take care of Daniel. Why don't you work outside?' she'd say, implying it was the norm for a daughter-in-law to work when living together. She labeled me lazy for staying home. Adding insult to injury, she criticized my weight gain post-childbirth, accusing me of laziness. Despite feeling unwell, I resumed work, but I chose part-time hours to be with Daniel. Yet my mother-in-law wasn't satisfied. 'Can't you work more?' she'd demand. I could, but Daniel was still young, and I yearned for more time with him. However, expressing this only earned me more disdain. 'Oh, are you implying dissatisfaction with my care? I raise Andy. I can raise a child better than you, who fell ill right after childbirth. Just work longer hours,' she'd retort. I felt overwhelmed by her attitude, so I confided in Andy. Hoping for support, I explained, 'She wants me to work more, but I don't want to sacrifice time with Daniel. Can you talk to her?' Disappointingly, Andy sided with his mother. 'Mom knows best about raising kids. You're only working part-time, right? We're here to save money, so just do as she says. Besides, you hadn't lost your post-pregnancy weight,' he scoffed, echoing my mother-in-law's criticisms and urging me to work harder. One day, my mother-in-law decided to take matters into her own hands by calling my workplace and persuading them to increase my hours. Her connection with the part-time leader at the supermarket ensured my compliance. Unable to oppose this decision, I found myself juggling longer shifts alongside the already burdensome household chores. I barely had a moment for Daniel amidst the relentless demands. 'Leave Daniel to me,' my mother-in-law would insist. 'You focus on work and house chores. And mind you, you haven't shed any weight yet, have you?' 'It's rather unsightly,' she'd remark, her criticisms cutting deep. Yet when Daniel needed attention or made a mess, suddenly, I was expected to intervene promptly. 'You're his mother? Handle it. Can't you discipline him properly?' she'd scold, adding another layer of pressure. One particularly frustrating day, as I diligently cleaned the yard per my mother-in-law's instructions, Andy's criticism stung. 'Why are you so dirty? Don't come in the house like that,' he chided, oblivious to my efforts. Feeling unjustly attacked, I snapped back, airing my grievances about the unequal distribution of household responsibilities. His reaction was dismissive, directing me to another room without so much as a glance. Fed up with the situation, I made a decision. Despite most of my salary going towards household expenses, I began documenting my mother-in-law and Andy's behavior. I recorded their words on my phone and meticulously chronicled daily events in a diary. It was a step towards reclaiming my voice and asserting my worth. On a chilly winter day, I gathered the courage to ask Andy for some money to invest in winter clothes. 'Why do you need new ones?' he retorted, dismissing my request. 'You earn so little yet desire luxuries. Your old ones should suffice. Besides, they don't fit anymore,' he added, not hesitating to critique my weight gain. With a begrudging gesture, he tossed a $50 bill my way. 'That should cover a few items,' he remarked brusquely. Though I knew $50 wouldn't stretch far, I accepted it gratefully, silently plotting my exit from Andy's family home. On my way back from work, I stopped by a store and purchased a much-needed down jacket, a small step toward reclaiming some sense of comfort and security. However, my relief was short-lived. The following day, to my dismay, my new down jacket was nowhere to be found. Confused and frustrated, I approached my mother-in-law, who lounged leisurely in the living room. 'Have you seen my down jacket?' I inquired. Her response left me speechless. "Oh, I assumed you didn't need it anymore, so I got rid of it," she remarked casually. "What? I just bought it yesterday," I exclaimed incredulously. Her nonchalant reply only added insult to injury. "Did you? I must have placed it in the shed outside. Why don't you go and check?" Hastily, I dashed to the shed, my heart sinking as I found my new jacket discarded amidst the refuse. Despite the biting cold, I attempted to salvage it, but the stench lingered stubbornly. Knowing that burning it indoors would only invite more complaints from my mother-in-law and Andy, I resolved to hand-wash it in the dead of night, hoping to conceal the evidence of its mishap. The next day brought another devastating discovery. Returning home from work, I noticed an eerie emptiness in my bedroom. All the drawers on the shelf that housed my clothes were devoid of their contents. My wardrobe had been stripped bare. Racing to confront my mother-in-law, I demanded answers. "Where are my clothes?" I implored. Her response hit me like a blow. "You bought new ones, didn't you? So repurpose your old, dirty clothes into rags for cleaning. Now you can contribute to the household chores," she retorted callously. My heart sank further as I opened the cleaning closet, confirming her words. There, amidst the cleaning supplies, lay rags fashioned from my discarded garments. And as if her cruelty knew no bounds, I noticed my jacket, which had been left out to dry on the balcony, was now missing. "You're always complaining about being cold," my mother-in-law interjected, her tone laced with false concern. "So, I took the liberty of lighting a bonfire for you in the yard." With a slight, insincere smile, she motioned towards the garden outside my window, where flames danced in the fire pit. Peering outside, I watched in disbelief as shreds of my jacket fluttered in the wind. "You burned my clothes. How am I supposed to survive this winter?" I protested, my voice trembling with outrage. But my mother-in-law remained indifferent to my distress. "You're chubby, so you'll be fine," she quipped callously before sauntering away, a smirk playing on her lips. I was left speechless, grappling with a mixture of fury and despair. With trembling hands, I hastily gathered my essentials. My diary, phone, and precious Daniel wrapped snugly in my only remaining coat. Ignoring the biting cold, I fled from Andy's house, clad only in a thin t-shirt, as heavy snowflakes cascaded around me. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of my situation. Thankfully, a compassionate neighbor, who had always harbored suspicions about my strained relationship with my mother-in-law, came to my aid. Despite the tension between them, this neighbor had remained vigilant, concerned for my well-being since the day I moved in with Andy's family. Recognizing the signs of distress, they offered me refuge and swiftly transported me to my parents' home, an hour away. Upon my arrival, my mother's eyes widened in alarm at the sight of my scant attire. "Why are you dressed like that? Are you feeling unwell? Is it too warm in the car?" she fretted, her concern palpable. Forced to flee Andy's household, I found myself in a dire situation. My clothes reduced to rags, my new jacket consumed by flames. All along, I had been meticulously gathering evidence for what I hoped would be a favorable divorce, but the threat to my safety became too palpable to ignore. With Daniel snugly wrapped in a coat, mercifully asleep, I fled, tears of relief streaming down my face at the thought that my mother-in-law hadn't wrested him from my arms. My mother, recognizing the urgency of my plight, sprang into action, rallying support. She swiftly reached out to my father and another individual whose intervention would prove crucial in the days to come. The following day brought a glimmer of hope in the form of unexpected aid. Responding to my mother's urgent call, my father-in-law's mother, whom we affectionately referred to as Grandma, arrived at our doorstep. As it turned out, my father and Andy's late father had shared a deep bond, and Grandma, despite the passing years, had maintained ties with my family. Our connection through these familial bonds had initially brought Andy and me together, forging the path to our marriage. Before our union, Auntie, Grandma's daughter and Andy's mother, had exuded warmth and kindness towards my parents. However, the relentless pressure and harassment from Andy's mother gradually tainted Andy's demeanor, transforming his once affable nature into cold indifference towards me. As I laid out the evidence before Grandma, her fury mirrored that of my parents. Without hesitation, she sprang into action, swiftly contacting a lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. In a matter of days, arrangements were made, and we, accompanied by my parents and Grandma, embarked on a visit to Andy's family home, leaving Daniel in the capable care of my nearby sister. Upon our arrival, my mother-in-law's reaction was predictably hostile. "Where's Daniel? You kidnappers?" she bellowed as she stormed out of the house. However, Grandma, undeterred, stepped forward to challenge her accusation. "Who are you calling the kidnapper, you money grubber?" she retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. Andy, apparently having taken time off work for the occasion, joined us as we gathered to discuss the impending divorce, Daniel's custody, and the fate of the family property. As tensions simmered, the lawyer laid out the plan. "We're here to address Rosetta and Andy's divorce, determine custody arrangements for Daniel, and discuss the sale of this property," he announced solemnly. Andy scoffed at the notion of selling the property. "What do you mean by selling the land? It's Dad's ancestral home, and Mom inherited it. You can't just sell it," he interjected derisively. The lawyer, however, remained unfazed, presenting a document outlining the overdue land rent payments spanning several years since Andy's father's passing. While the building may be under Andy's mother's ownership, the land itself belongs to Andy's father's family, the lawyer explained calmly. "We've been lenient regarding the unpaid land rent, but now it's time to settle the debt and proceed with the sale." The document detailed the accumulated rent for the land over several years following the passing of my father-in-law. As my mother-in-law scanned the figures, a look of shock crossed her face. How can we pay this all of a sudden?" she exclaimed in disbelief. Grandma swiftly silenced her with a stern quiet before addressing the issue at hand. "We've been sending you notifications every month. You chose to ignore them," she rebuked. "And more importantly, you need to make amends for how you've treated Rosetta." Unmoved, my mother-in-law attempted to deflect the blame. "Rosetta's accusations. She's just my daughter-in-law. Why should it concern anyone else?" she argued defiantly. "She's probably making things up. She's always been deceitful, finding excuses to avoid chores and work," my mother-in-law continued, her voice rising in frustration as she directed her accusations towards Grandma. "I've never lied simply because you believe I'm overweight," I asserted firmly, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "You've burdened me with endless chores, robbing me of precious time with my child. Do you have any idea how difficult it was to be instructed to brave the winter cold in nothing but a t-shirt? You've been spreading these falsehoods to anyone who will listen, always eager to shirk responsibility," my mother-in-law retorted with a smug grin. However, her confidence waned when I played back the recorded snippets of her and Andy's snide comments from my phone. "That's fabricated," she exclaimed, her facade faltering. In a moment of frustration and desperation, I dashed to the closet, snatching up a rag crafted from my discarded clothes. Slamming it onto the table, I challenged her. "How do you explain this? My clothes reduced to rags, just as captured in the recording." "Enough, Rosetta. Perhaps Mom's actions were a tad extreme, but let's not overlook the fact that your lack of effort only fueled her frustration," Andy interjected, his tone laced with condescension. "Before pointing fingers, take a moment to reflect on your own actions." "Excuse me, are you blind? Since moving here, I've shed at least 22 pounds, he continued defensively. "The reason my clothes don't fit isn't because I've gained weight, but because I've lost it so rapidly. Everyone except you and Mom is concerned about how thin I've become." Andy's words seemed to dawn on him as he acknowledged the extent of my weight loss. "I deeply regret entrusting Rosetta to your care," my father chimed in, his voice tight with restrained anger. Clenching his fists on his lap, he fixed the steely gaze on Andy and the others. "But I've been the primary caregiver for Daniel," Andy persisted, his determination evident. "Rosetta simply isn't equipped to handle him. We're prepared to take this to court to ensure we retain custody of Daniel." "Indeed, courts typically lean towards the mother's favor," the lawyer interjected calmly, his tone carrying an air of authority. "But consider this. Would they entrust Daniel to individuals who fail to even notice Rosetta's dramatic weight loss? Can you afford the expenses associated with hiring a lawyer and covering court fees? Furthermore, I will also be pursuing claims for alimony and land rent for this property." The gravity of the situation seemed to dawn on my mother-in-law. "This is so unjust," she muttered, her voice trembling with frustration. "Who's being unjust here?" My father countered, his tone firm. "Both of you have tormented Rosetta and even attempted to separate her from Daniel. Where did the money Rosetta earned go? Why did she flee to her parents' home in nothing but a t-shirt, carrying Daniel through a snowstorm?" My usually reticent mother-in-law's facade crumbled as she began to weep, casting blame on my mother-in-law. "I am truly sorry. We will make amends for spoiling Daniel and causing Rosetta such anguish," Grandma spoke up, addressing us directly before signaling to the lawyer. Simply settle your debts and we'll sever all direct ties with you and inform our relatives, I asserted firmly. Following that resolution, I tendered my resignation from the part-time position, duly informing headquarters of my mother-in-law's meddling. The company expressed regret and assured me of measures to prevent such power imbalances among part-timers. While no repercussions were reported for the individual acquainted with my mother-in-law, assurances were made regarding future safeguards. In the ensuing weeks, my divorce from Andy reached its conclusion. Securing custody of Daniel and receiving a fair amount of child support, I navigated the challenges with resolve. Andy's financial strain was palpable, particularly as he assumed responsibility for the outstanding land rent. Grandma's light-hearted jest about the house's fate hinted at the irony of the situation. Transitioning to a new phase of life, I relished the opportunity to reside with my parents, cherishing the precious moments spent with Daniel. With plans to eventually join my father's company, I utilized the divorce settlement to rejuvenate my wardrobe, reveling in the joy of coordinating outfits with Daniel. As I looked toward the future, I eagerly anticipated the prospect of devoting even more time to my son. My brother invited us to stay at his place, and we won't have to pay rent or bills. Ashley, we're relying on you for this. I work in finance. My husband, let's call him Bob, fixes cars, and we live in the house I grew up in. But it's not like my parents live there anymore. It's actually a family business that my dad used to run. My brother was supposed to take over the company, so he studied economics in college. Also, my skilled brother went to Oxford University overseas to study business management, then came back to the US and teamed up with my dad for a while. When my parents decided to retire and move to a place like Aspen, Colorado, to enjoy nature and relaxation, my brother took over the family business. As a result, they passed the family home down to me, their daughter. So my husband and I decided to move in there. It's in a great spot, less than 5 minutes walk from the train station, and public transportation is easy to get to. Stores, hospitals, and schools are all nearby, which is handy. It's nice to know that as our kids grow up and move out, we'll still have everything we need close by. It makes me thankful that my parents left us this house. We were looking forward to growing our family and enjoying life, but we never imagined it would all be cut short by what happened. Since we moved in, my mother-in-law has been dropping by a lot. She's always curious about my parents' business and how much they're worth. It gets uncomfortable when she starts asking, "Hey, Ashley, what's the deal with your parents' money? How much will you get when they're gone?" I find it pretty tasteless, to be honest. I don't want to be rude, so I just say, I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about it. I already have the house, so maybe there won't be much else. Even though I tried to brush it off with a laugh, she keeps pushing, saying, "Come on, they're getting up there in age. You never know what might happen." She was really fixated on talking about my parents' money. It felt like she was banking on their wealth. Even though I knew what I was set to inherit, I kept quiet. I didn't want to spill the beans to my mother-in-law or my husband, who's pretty close to her. But then, out of nowhere, something unbelievable happened. One holiday morning, around 8 a.m., the doorbell rang, and when I answered it, there were movers standing there. My mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family had moved in without warning. I was completely caught off guard when the movers showed up. My mother-in-law and brother-in-law's family just waltzed in with big smiles, announcing they were moving in. Their enthusiasm sent shivers down my spine. When I turned to my husband for an explanation, he shrugged it off, saying, "What's the big deal if Mom and the others crash here? We've got plenty of space." He acted like it was no big deal to have them move in. I was already shocked enough by the sudden living arrangement, but then my sister-in-law dropped a bombshell. "Our brother invited us, Ashley. He said we don't have to pay rent or bills, so we're relying on you." Meanwhile, my brother-in-law started claiming rooms without asking, saying, "This room looks nice. Let's have it, Bob. Move everything out into the hallway." It all made my head spin. I couldn't believe it. They were treating my house like their own, claiming rooms left and right. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family have been overstepping boundaries for a while now, especially my sister-in-law, who even went through my bag without asking once. If this keeps up, they'll try to take over my room too. I've had enough. This is my house, and they're acting like they own it. I've reached my limit. I want everyone out. I'm not usually one to lose my temper or yell, But seeing these people move into the house my parents left me without asking and acting like they owned it pushed me over the edge. That's why I ended up shouting at all three of them. But then something I didn't expect occurred. "How dare you speak to us like that? You're the one who needs to leave." As soon as those words were out, I felt a sharp pain in my cheek. Did I just get slapped? It took a few moments for it to sink in. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what had just happened, and all I felt was the throbbing pain in my cheek. In that instant, something inside me snapped. I couldn't bear living with people capable of such disrespect. This house belongs to me, and I won't tolerate them treating it like their own personal space. I packed my things, planning to leave and inform my family about the situation. I needed to find a place far from here, so I rented a monthly apartment even though it meant a longer commute to work. When I broke the news to my parents over the phone, I could sense their anger, especially from my dad. He's always been supportive and caring, both as a CEO and as a father. I didn't want to drag my parents, who were about to retire, into this mess, but I had no choice. My inherited home was being taken away from me, and I had to do something about it. While I was staying in the monthly apartment, I was certain that my husband and his family were making themselves at home in my house. So I decided to take action based on suggestions from my brother and father. A few days later, during my break, I checked my phone to find numerous missed calls and messages from my husband. I knew exactly why he was reaching out. I had arranged for the water and electricity to be cut off. Since our house relies solely on electricity and we haven't installed solar panels yet, it must be quite challenging without power, especially in the heat. My husband's calls were probably about dealing with the situation. Just as I was about to ignore it, he called again, perfectly timing his call with my break. "Hey, what's happening? There's no electricity and the water's not running. Did you turn off the electricity and water?" I could sense the panic in my husband's voice over the phone. Since the house is mine and I'm not living there anymore, it only makes sense to cut off the utilities, right? That's why I had it done. I can't bear the thought of paying bills for a house I'm not even living in. So of course I had them shut off. But my husband was livid, demanding that I reinstate the contracts immediately. Just because he wants it doesn't mean I'll agree. If they want utilities, they should handle it with their own finances. Yet they always say, "It's your house, so you should pay." But their actions contradict their words. Regardless, I have no plans to renew the contracts or foot the bill. If they're unhappy about it, they should leave the house. With that, I ended the call because my break was over. Later on, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law each called me separately. They were all complaining about the lack of electricity and water. They griped about how hot and uncomfortable their rooms were and how inconvenient it was without running water. But those were their problems, not mine. After hearing them out, I firmly told them to sort it out themselves and ended the calls. I thought they were just being greedy and assumed they'd give up and leave soon. However, even after a week passed, they showed no signs of leaving. So I decided to take further action. I sought advice from my father's company lawyer and asked him to send a notice to my husband. The notice was about trespassing. They had unlawfully entered my property without permission, forced me out, and were now occupying it as if it were theirs. I warned them, all four of them, that I was considering legal action. Why did I receive a lawyer's letter? Did it have to come to this? My husband, clearly taken aback and unprepared for my strong response, approached me seeking a compromise. I knew they cared deeply about their reputation, and the thought of being sued would be a severe blow to them. They wanted to avoid legal trouble, but they also didn't want to give up their current lifestyle. So they were likely trying to persuade me to let them stay. I could see through my husband's intentions perfectly. Despite this, I refused to entertain their pleas. My husband finally snapped, losing his temper even though he was at work. He shouted at me, demanding that I back down and drop the lawyer, but his outburst didn't faze me. If anything, it only irritated me further. Who do you think you are, taking over someone else's house? I thought to myself, no matter how much you shout, I won't change my mind. If you insist on squatting there, I'll take legal action. Think carefully before you act. Despite his continued shouting over the phone, I paid him no heed and hung up. This was a waste of time, and I had already discussed divorce with my lawyer. When I arrived home, I saw missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but I knew they'd only be discussing settling the issue. I didn't want any more distractions, so I blocked their numbers to put an end to the calls. Eventually, my husband's proud family couldn't bear the thought of legal action, so they packed up and left the house. With the lawyer's involvement, the divorce proceedings progressed smoothly. I arranged for a cleaning service to restore the house to its former glory. Finally, I could enjoy the comfort of being back in my own, freshly cleaned home. Living separately from my husband's family and then in a rented apartment was fine, but nothing beats the comfort of my own space. Although some parts of the house are showing signs of wear, I'll need to think about renovating soon. I talked to my dad, and he recommended a great contractor for the renovation. Being on my own is surprisingly freeing. I can lounge on the couch without anyone nagging me, and I can eat whatever I please without judgment. Just as I was enjoying this newfound independence, I received a call from my ex-husband for the first time in 3 months. Initially, I ignored the call because I didn't recognize the number. But when it persisted, I reluctantly picked up, thinking it might be the contractor. However, as soon as I heard his voice, my mood plummeted. It was my ex-husband, from whom I had separated 3 months ago. I had already gone through the divorce process with the help of a lawyer, and we had agreed to stay out of each other's lives. So why was he calling me now, especially after changing his number? We had made it clear through legal channels that we wouldn't have any contact. There was no reason for us to speak. I was just about to end the call when he pleaded, "Please, just listen for a moment. I'm desperate." Reluctantly, I stayed on the line. It turned out his company was facing financial trouble, and he was facing a pay cut. On top of that, his mother's health was deteriorating, leaving her unable to work. My sister-in-law and her husband are struggling financially. He's unemployed, and she's juggling multiple part-time jobs just to keep up. Unfortunately, most of her earnings are going towards paying off his debts. Meanwhile, my ex-husband is facing a pay cut, making it even harder for him to make ends meet. As they poured out their troubles to me, all I could muster was a detached, "Okay, I see." After all, these are the same people who invaded my home without permission, disregarded my rights, and then tried to force me out. It's hard to summon any sympathy for them. Their problems are their own to deal with. There's nothing I can do to help. My ex-husband's desperation only escalated. "Please don't turn your back on us. We're on the brink here. We won't even have a roof over our heads or food on the table tomorrow. Remember, we used to be a family. Can't you help us?" His voice trembled with near tears, but I remained unmoved. When I faced difficulties, he offered no support and even joined my mother-in-law in belittling me. Just like her, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law looked down on me, mocking my appearance and traditional values. They shunned me for being too old-fashioned. Their insults cut deep, yet they showed no remorse. As for my mother-in-law, she exacerbated the situation by pressuring me to conceive, subjecting me to strange remedies, scheduling unnecessary doctor's visits, and spreading rumors of my infertility. Looking back, my marriage held no redeeming qualities. My ex-husband, who used to be so caring before our marriage, transformed into a puppet controlled by my mother-in-law after we tied the knot. On the day my mother-in-law barged into our home, I happened to be out for an appointment. She expressed disappointment to my husband, saying I wanted to see Ashley, but she wasn't here. "I want us to be friends, but I'm saddened." Upon hearing his mother's distress, my ex-husband lashed out at me without considering my side of the story. She claims she wants us to get along, but all she does is criticize me. "Has my son lost weight because your cooking is so terrible?" She says things like this loudly, whether we're at home or out in public. With her and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law all ganging up on me, there's no chance for us to have a harmonious relationship. I can't deal with people who behave like this anymore. No matter what you say, my decision stands. I can't assist you, so I'm ending this call now, and I don't want to hear from you again. With that, I hung up and blocked the new number. Knowing my ex-husband, he might change his number to reach me again. So I planned to change mine over the weekend. But before I could, they violated the lawyer's agreement. At 11 p.m., they showed up at my door, demanding entry and assistance. "Open the door. We're family. You should take care of us." Their loud banging and shouting disregarded the late hour. "What's going on at this hour? Please go home. You're disturbing the neighbors." When I approached the door, they seemed ready to force their way in. So I tried speaking through the intercom, but they ignored it, continuing to bang on the door and cause a commotion. Dealing with such unruly behavior left me speechless. I sat there feeling overwhelmed. contemplating whether to call the police when suddenly sirens blared from outside. It seemed a neighbor had taken action. Hearing the police approaching, the group, startled, assumed I had made the call and attempted to flee. But they were surrounded by onlookers, leaving them with no escape route. Soon the officers arrived and escorted them to the police station. I was questioned about the incident and provided a detailed account. News of the incident spread rapidly throughout the neighborhood, including to a colleague of my ex-husband's who happened to be among the spectators. By the next day, the entire office was buzzing with the story. Already struggling due to a pay cut, my ex-husband's troubles compounded when the company learned of his involvement with the police. He lost his job and couldn't afford his rent, leading to strained relations with his sister's family, ultimately leading to their shared living arrangement falling apart. Now, Bob and his mother reside in public housing, both working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Even his mother has joined the workforce part-time, desperate for additional income. When I first met my son's fiancée, she made fun of me. She laughed and said, "Your dad didn't even finish middle school. Can he even find a job with such low grades?" Her dad joined in, saying, "I can't believe he dropped out of high school and doesn't even work." And to add to that, they only serve food for themselves, leaving me out. The fiancé's mom explained cheerfully, "I only cook for my family." At a family gathering, someone said, "I've never seen parents act this way." Feeling hurt by my son and others, I decided to stand up for myself. I told them, "Say what you want," and left the restaurant in frustration. My name is Stephen Walker, and I turned 60 this year. I have a son named Michael, who's 25. Our relationship is rocky, and he rarely visits. I often blame myself for not raising him well, especially since my wife passed away when Michael was young. My wife had been weak since she was young, and she died when she was just 45. At her funeral, I didn't care about the disapproving looks from relatives. I felt lost like a child. My son, Michael, stayed strong, urging me to say goodbye to Mom. But my sorrow only lasted during the funeral. At that time, I was running a real estate business passed down from my father. The day after my wife's funeral, I woke up to calls from clients. I had responsibilities to fulfill, and I had to raise Michael on my own. I woke up from my days with those urgent calls and rushed to my office. Simultaneously, I started attending school events and PTA meetings, trying to fill the void left by my wife. But handling work and school commitments alone proved too much. I reluctantly closed my business temporarily and passed my clients to another agency to focus on being there for Michael. However, when I showed up at one of Michael's school events, he glared at me and said, "Dad, I told you not to come." He even whispered, "Don't let anyone know you're my dad," leaving me feeling like a stranger. Today, as I participate in PTA activities, I wear a name tag with the name Walker, unsure of where I truly belong. I couldn't understand why my son suddenly started ignoring me, but it didn't take long for me to figure it out. "Isn't that your dad over there? What's he doing at school on a weekday? Doesn't he have a job?" My mom remarked, "I heard your dad lost his job after your mom passed away." One of Michael's classmates chimed in. Michael stayed quiet, avoiding eye contact as the teasing continued. I hurried over, trying to explain, "I'm just taking a break from work. It's like your summer or winter vacation." But instead of easing the situation, my words only made things worse for Michael. His classmates mocked him further, saying things like, "Your dad's just pretending to take a break. Your family must be struggling financially." Feeling guilty, I realized my attempt to help only backfired. As Michael faced more ridicule from his classmates, his resentment towards me grew. I felt powerless as I witnessed his suffering, unable to intervene. Countless nights, I found myself in tears, overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. As Michael entered middle school, he began associating with troubled peers, spending nights away from home and loitering in gas station parking lots until late hours. Cell phones were rare back then, making it difficult to track his whereabouts. With each passing day, Michael's absences increased, leaving me clueless about his activities. I could only apologize when the school called to report complaints from nearby establishments. Whenever I visited Michael's school, he and his unruly friends hurled insults and projectiles at me, further deepening my feelings of inadequacy. Michael's behavior had taken a dangerous turn since starting middle school, leaving me terrified to confront him, fearing his unpredictable reactions. Reflecting on my parenting during his elementary years, I wished I had handled things differently, but I struggled to determine the right approach for addressing his misbehavior. Communicating with a teenager seemed like an insurmountable challenge, leaving me feeling lost and helpless. Michael showed no regard for attending school, frequently skipping classes and even running away during lessons. His academic performance plummeted to the lowest point. During a parent-teacher conference, they mentioned a private high school where Michael could enroll, bringing me a sense of relief. I was grateful that there was an option for him to continue his education. I hoped that the new environment and different classmates would positively influence him, leading to a change in his behavior. Thankfully, after starting high school, Michael began to take his studies more seriously. He dedicated himself to his classes, improving his test scores to above-average levels and eventually securing admission to college. Despite his academic progress, his attitude toward me remained unchanged. He continued to spend little time at home, moving from one friend's house to another. Upon entering college, he opted to live alone in a dorm and supported himself with part-time work to pay his tuition. While I admired his independence, his relationship with me remained distant. Even after he started his job, he showed no inclination to reconnect with his family. One day, completely out of the blue, Michael, whom I hadn't seen for years, called me. He said, "I'm planning to get married." Then he added, "We're meeting at a fancy restaurant next Sunday at 2 p.m., without considering my schedule. I was taken aback by the suddenness of it all. But when I expressed my concerns, he simply responded, "If you can't make it, don't bother," and hung up abruptly. Despite feeling conflicted, I couldn't deny that he was my only son. So I decided to attend the meeting for his sake. When I arrived at the restaurant, his future in-laws were already there, greeting me with rudeness. I retorted, feeling annoyed by their attitude, but they denied having invited me at all. They were as cold as Michael had been on the phone. Meanwhile, Michael stood there with a smirk, seeming like he was up to something. Unsure of his intentions, I reluctantly entered the restaurant. However, instead of discussing Michael's relationship with Sarah, they directed their attention towards me, treating me like an unwelcome guest. To my dismay, Michael began criticizing me in front of Sarah and her family, disregarding the inappropriate timing and setting. Despite my protests, he continued unabated. To make matters worse, Sarah burst into laughter, mocking, "Seriously, can someone even find a job with just a middle school education?" Her father chimed in, praising Michael for having a college degree and a job at a prestigious company, contrasting him with me, a high school dropout. Exhausted and frustrated, I almost uttered, "Say what you want, I'm leaving." But before I could, a waiter arrived with the food, apologizing for the delay. I had been so worked up that I had forgotten we hadn't even been served yet. Trying to calm myself down, I resolved to eat quickly and leave. However, when the food arrived, it was only for Michael, Sarah, and her parents. The waiter explained that they had a reservation for 4, giving me a disapproving look. Sarah's mother dismissed me, saying, "He's not part of our family, so don't worry about him," with a fake smile. Feeling humiliated, I watched as the waiter awkwardly retreated. Just as I was about to lose my temper, Sarah's dad interrupted me sharply, declaring, "We don't associate with high school dropouts like you. Our family is filled with bank employees and doctors from top companies. You don't belong here. Please leave." His words stung, and I couldn't hold back. "Is education and job status all that matter to you? Seems like your priorities are a bit skewed," I retorted as I stood to depart. In response, Sarah's dad boasted about his job at Bank of America, emphasizing the importance of education and work history. As I made my exit, I sarcastically acknowledged his accomplishment, but they paid me no heed. The following day, I visited Bank of America, where Sarah's dad worked. Despite being labeled a deadbeat by my son, his peers, and Sarah's family, I knew I wasn't one. After my wife's passing, I temporarily closed my real estate business to focus on my son's well-being. However, I want to make it clear that it was only a temporary measure. Following her death, I transitioned my business to online management to prioritize my involvement in my son's school activities and PTA meetings. When I operated a physical store, my clients were mostly local neighbors. However, transitioning to online management opened doors to a wider clientele, including people from small towns located far from the nearest train station and even Americans living abroad. This shift allowed me to receive more inquiries about renting and buying properties from these individuals. The internet enabled me to expand my property portfolio and reach a broader audience, turning what once seemed like a dream into reality. Moreover, I had a keen interest in stocks and investments, which I pursued as a hobby. Currently, I had $50 million invested in Bank of America, where Sarah's dad worked. Upon reaching the bank, I immediately requested to speak with the branch manager and recounted the events from the previous day. One of your employees mentioned that this bank values trust based on educational background and work history. Due to that statement, I've lost faith in this bank. Could you please proceed with closing my account? The branch manager apologized profusely and explained the account closure process, visibly distressed. Oh, I almost forgot something important. There's a tenant in one of my apartments who hasn't paid rent for 2 years. I've been lenient because he's my son, but not anymore. I sent him a notice demanding payment for 2 years' worth of rent. 3 days later, Sarah's dad and my son barged into my house fuming. Why did you report me to the branch manager? That was sneaky, Dad. And what's with the eviction notice? If you're the landlord, at least cover for me. I sighed and replied, I lost trust in the bank after hearing about their judgmental practices. Are you panicking because of one person's comment? Do you have something to hide? And Michael being family doesn't excuse you from paying rent. Pay up, Sarah's dad retorted. Because of your actions, I received complaints from other clients. My boss even reprimanded me. How dare you? I didn't cause trouble. I simply shared the story with relatives and clients. I didn't tell them to close their accounts. I responded calmly. My son lashed out. What clients, Dad? You're just a deadbeat, right? How could a deadbeat afford to build a huge house like this in such a prime location and still live like this? I even did some renovations recently. I explained, but he looked puzzled, saying, what's that? Did you go into debt or something? I'm really fed up with you. I took a break from my real estate job for a while, then switched to running an online business, which I'm still doing. How many times do I have to explain? I'm not a bum, I told him, and he turned pale. What? I had no clue. I thought you were just working part-time, Sarah's dad yelled. You're a real piece of work, keeping your occupation secret even from your own son. Annoyed, I replied, say what you want, and closed the door. Outside, I heard them shouting, you've ruined my reputation. I'm gonna sue you. I can't believe I've been fooled by my old man for so long. After about 10 minutes of yelling, it seemed they grew tired, and the commotion quieted down. I figured they wouldn't bother returning once they realized their shouting was futile. With a sigh of relief, I headed to the kitchen to brew a cup of coffee. Suddenly, I heard my son's voice outside again, accusing me of being a liar. Peering out the window, I saw Sarah's dad and my son spray painting my front door. You've got to be kidding me. What are they up to? Just as I prepared to confront them, the sound of approaching police sirens caught my attention. Could it be that someone in the neighborhood had called the cops? My suspicion proved correct. Stepping outside, I found the two of them being detained by the police in response to a neighbor's complaint. There he is, that liar. He's ruined my reputation at work, they shouted as the officers calmly escorted them into the patrol car, assuring, we'll handle it from here. One of the officers, noticing me, approached with an oddly cheerful demeanor. Sir, would you mind coming with us to provide your statement? Why me? But I'm the one who's been wronged here. I'll spill all the details on their mischief, I thought as we arrived at the police station, showing the officers a video from my phone, captured by the security camera at my front door. I revealed the entirety of their yelling and antics. This is excellent evidence, the officer exclaimed excitedly, and my interrogation concluded swiftly. My son and Sarah's dad received a stern warning from the police and were required to sign a restraining order to stay away from me. As it turned out, the entire neighborhood had witnessed their bizarre behavior. One of my son's coworkers, who lived nearby, had been gossiping about it at the office. Hey, you won't believe it, but Michael was caught spray painting his own father's house and got taken away by the cops, they exclaimed. I was astonished. Thankfully, I had recorded the entire incident. My son's reputation took a nosedive at work and among clients, resulting in his demotion by his boss. I decided to report the incident once more to Bank of America, where Sarah's dad was employed. Upon showing the manager the security footage from my phone, his expression turned ashen. It wasn't long before I heard that Sarah's dad had been dismissed from his job. Naturally, Sarah called off her engagement with Michael. Both Michael and Sarah's family relocated to a rural area, where they found work at a gas station run by my brother. However, they struggled to adapt, and I had to let them go due to their incompetence. Word around town was that other nearby businesses had similar experiences with Sarah's parents who couldn't hold down a steady job. They bounced between gigs at gas stations and farms as a couple. Additionally, I learned that Sarah had lavished expensive gifts, including watches, on her boyfriends, including my son, and had accrued significant debt as a result. Her parents used their part-time earnings to repay her debts, leaving them financially strained. It remains a mystery how they managed to make ends meet. Fast forward 5 years and my son, now 30, seems to have turned over a new leaf after experiencing kindness in the small town he moved to. He came to me a few times, sincerely apologizing for his past behavior. I was naive and immature. I didn't bother to understand your job and simply dismissed you as a good-for-nothing. I deeply regret it. Witnessing my son's change in attitude, I decided to invite him to live with me. He now works at a company near my home and gradually lends a hand with my work. However, let me be clear, he still has much to learn, and I'm cautious about fully trusting him. While I'm hesitant to delegate all my responsibilities to him, I'll observe his work ethic and attitude closely before making any decisions. If he demonstrates genuine transformation, I may consider passing on the management of my business to him. But if I were to mention this, he might get overly eager and impulsively resign, so I'll keep my plans to myself. Living with my son, I hold on to the hope that one day I'll feel comfortable entrusting him with everything. I'm Christina, 25 years old, and I mostly keep to myself. Even though I have a job or study, my family might think I don't because I don't talk about it much, especially my brother. How did I end up like this? Well, it all goes back to my time in middle school when I started feeling like I couldn't trust people. It's not just one thing that caused it, but mostly because I felt ignored. I guess people didn't find me interesting because I was always into machines. I've always enjoyed messing around with computers, and I was pretty good at it, which helped out at home. But then my school grades dropped because I spent more time with computers than with friends, and my parents got worried. When I finished elementary school, my parents started telling me off, saying, "Stop spending so much time with those machines." During middle school, as my parents kept scolding me, I started feeling like I shouldn't pursue my interests. So whenever I have free time from school, I'd hide in my room to avoid my parents, cutting off contact with the outside world. This made more people think I was strange or risky, and I started feeling isolated even at school. The only person who supported me was my brother Keith. He always knew how to cheer me up and keep me going. With his help, I finished school. But I didn't go to high school. Instead, I did computer jobs from home. When I was about 16, I got a part-time job, and with the money I earned, I bought old computers to take apart and rebuild from scratch, just the way I liked. My hobby became a business opportunity, and by the time I hit 20, I was making and selling computers. Soon, I started my own business, offering affordable computers, and became quite well known. By the time I turned 25, I'd made a decent amount of money. I even started contributing $2,500 to my parents' household each month and still had money left over. Even though I tried explaining my job to my parents, they didn't get it. After a few arguments, they decided that as long as I could support myself, they didn't mind what I did. This meant they stopped interfering and I could live as I pleased at home. But my brother still didn't think much of me. My brother used to be my ally, the one who understood me best when I was in school. He was really kind, but maybe he got tired of his sister, who was still at her parents' house tinkering with machines even after turning 20. Over time, he started treating me harshly whenever he saw me. Since I didn't keep quiet about it, we ended up having more conflicts, and now we're not on good terms. Things got even worse after my brother got married. His wife, who he'd known since high school, never really liked me. After hearing about me from my brother, she didn't want to be my sister-in-law and seemed to influence my brother against me. Because of this ongoing situation, I became known as the troublemaker at home. Even though I stayed in my room most of the time, I felt my heart breaking from all the hostility directed at me, which was different from my parents' concerned words. Suddenly, my parents' home, once a cozy sanctuary despite the criticisms, turned into a hostile environment. I no longer felt comfortable there, and it seemed like my parents were being swayed against me while my allies disappeared. Even though I had my own income and contributed to the household expenses, my brother and sister-in-law, who didn't understand my work, saw me as a burden. They started talking about kicking me out and taking over the house. Feeling disconnected from my brother and his plans, I figured leaving wouldn't make much of a difference. Once I found a new place, I wouldn't have to contribute to household expenses anymore, which meant I could save that money instead. It was kind of a silver lining. As I was thinking about moving out, my brother brought up the topic of inheritance out of the blue. He seemed to think that our parents' financial comfort, despite my lack of a traditional job, was due to their wealth. So when the idea of me leaving came up, he suggested, "Since we'll be taking care of mom and dad, we should inherit their assets. You should give up your share of the inheritance." But the truth was, the reason our parents could enjoy their lives without working was because I was covering their living expenses. I didn't think they could manage without that money, but my brother saw me as nothing but a burden in my room. Despite feeling like leaving was the best option, I decided to ask one more time out of kindness. "Are you really okay with me leaving?" I asked. My brother just laughed and said, "We'd be happy if you left already." It became clear once again how little he understood. I felt sorry for him and his wife, which made me even more determined to leave. A few days later, I was still in my room, and my brother and sister-in-law were relentless in their efforts to get me out. They kept knocking on my door, convinced mom to stop cooking for me, and even told me to do my own laundry. But these were all things I'd have to do if I lived alone anyway. I wasn't going to just sit back and let them take my place away from me without a fight. Sure, I wasn't happy about it, but I wasn't about to accept it either. I was being unfairly pushed out, and I wasn't going to take it lying down. After all, unskilled with machines, something my brother seemed to forget. He didn't realize the power I had with a computer at my disposal. I wasn't the type to quietly obey orders and leave. My brother's marriage, with me as the reclusive sister, was the only chance for our parents to have a grandchild. They were so focused on that, they didn't see how wrong it was for me to leave. So I decided to set up a little surprise for them, a trap that would spring into action as soon as I left the house. After finding a new place to live and completing all the necessary procedures, I was ready to leave my family home. Just before I departed, I left a farewell message for my parents and brother. "I've been supporting the family, and you've forgotten all the good I've done. I hope you realize who the real burden on our family wealth is." My parents seemed surprised for a moment, but they probably trusted that my brother would figure things out somehow. They all brushed off my words as bitterness. I knew they didn't take me seriously. But for now, I believed it was best to leave things this way. So I left the house. I took a significant amount of equipment from my family home and bought additional items, along with necessary furniture and appliances for my new place. I set up my new place just the way I wanted it, decorating it with my favorite style and creating a cozy atmosphere. It turned out to be a perfect environment for me to work in, and surprisingly, living alone wasn't as intimidating as I thought it would be. In fact, I wished I had made the move sooner. The people in the neighborhood were friendly and life was comfortable. Since leaving my family home and taking care of everything on my own, I've been enjoying myself, trying out new experiences. While I was reveling in my newfound independence, I wondered how things were going back at my family home, especially since they lost my financial support. Then, out of the blue, my mother called. "Hey, Christina, did you do something to our machines?" she asked. "What do you mean?" I replied. "There's something wrong with the computers and electronics," she said. "I have no idea about that," I said, puzzled. "I used to help out for free because we're family, but since you treated me poorly and kicked me out, even though you're my parents, you'll have to pay the regular price," I explained. "What? That's pretty greedy. We're your parents. Can't you give us a discount?" They responded. "Well, I prefer giving discounts to my friends. Unlike you, they treat me well," I countered. "Fine, you're so cheap," they grumbled. Internally, I sighed with relief that another trap hadn't been triggered and dealt with the situation calmly. But my mother didn't seem to appreciate my response. She abruptly hung up, behaving like a sulking child, and even sent a spiteful email implying that mean people lose friends. It made me question who was acting like the mature one. Frankly, it seemed self-centered, if not downright selfish. As for what I did to the family computer, I simply restored all the adjustments I had previously made for free back to their original settings. To someone unfamiliar, it might seem like the computer malfunctioned on its own. When I suggested they contact the company for repairs as an individual, they got upset. But I expected as much, so I let it go. 6 months after leaving home and settling into my new life, my father called me. "I hate to ask, but can you lend me some money?" he said. "What do you mean? Lend you money?" I responded. "Your brother and his wife have been spending recklessly. They think we're rich, and they keep complaining, asking for money to buy this or go there," he explained. "I have no idea about any of this. Why do you always come to me with everything? I've heard of daughters who live alone sending money home, but parents asking their children for money? Shouldn't it be the other way around, out of generosity?" I questioned. "It's not that simple," he replied. "Well, even $500 would help," he added. "I'm not giving you anything. I won't lend you money either. I have no intention of financially supporting you anymore," I firmly stated. "Of course, I'll work on your machines if you pay for my services," I replied calmly. "You've really become stingy," they retorted. "I guess Mom was right about you." They went on complaining about my unemployed years, but I didn't let it bother me. I just ended the call. My father didn't send any emails, but he started calling me multiple times a day, which I found annoying. What troublesome parents I have, I thought to myself. A few days later, my brother, sounding desperate, called me. When I asked why they kept contacting me, he asked, "Do you know why our family was wealthy?" It seemed like he suspected their financial situation had worsened since I moved out. But it was too late. My current home was my sanctuary. My work and life were all centered around this house, and I had no intention of leaving it again. Could it be that our family's wealth came from the $2,500 I was contributing each month? I pondered. I didn't have to give that much, but I felt grateful for my upbringing, so I willingly contributed more. But now, why would I continue supporting a home that kicked me out? It didn't make sense, right? So that's when Mom and Dad's finances took a hit. My brother realized. "I'm sorry, but even if you asked me to come back, I have no intention of doing so," I replied firmly. "I understand now that what happened was wrong. I'm sorry, but it's too late for apologies. I have no plans to have any involvement with you in the future. Please don't call me anymore." "Hey, wait," my brother protested, but I ended the call. When I left home, I made a vow never to be drawn back into their drama. Forgiving them wasn't something I could do easily. I decided to cancel my cell phone contract to avoid the constant calls. 5 years have passed since then, and I've moved on. I got married and started a new chapter in my life. My partner is in the same line of work as me, so he understands my lifestyle and helps out with household chores. Although I thought about reaching out to my parents since they're technically family, I felt it was too late. I hadn't made any attempts to reconnect. However, my husband expressed an interest in meeting my parents and learning about their current situation. To gain insight, I hired a detective to investigate. What we discovered was shocking. My parents, desperate to maintain their lifestyle and keep my brother and his wife tied to the family home, had accrued a mountain of debt from various lenders. With no hope of repayment, the debt continued to grow with accumulating interest, leaving them in a dire situation. The debt from my parents alone exceeded $100,000, and their house had been used as collateral. Now, where our family home once stood, it was only an empty lot. Although I felt a twinge of sadness due to my sentimental attachment to our family home, I couldn't help but think that my parents were facing the consequences of their actions. I decided to look into my brother's current situation. It appeared that my brother had suggested a divorce due to his wife's extravagant spending habits, but she vehemently opposed the idea. They were now embroiled in a drawn-out divorce lawsuit, which was draining both their time and finances. His wife had hired a lawyer and was resisting the divorce, refusing to let go of my brother, leaving them at an impasse. Despite rumors, my brother and his wife hadn't yet had children. To confirm, I sent the detective to the hospital where they were being treated. It turned out my brother was indeed infertile, nearly incapable of producing sperm, making natural conception highly unlikely. My parents, who had pinned their hopes on having grandchildren from my brother and his wife, were disappointed and ended their cohabitation. The family home had to be sold to settle the debt, marking the sad state of my family. This distressing reality became apparent after a cursory investigation. It was evident that engaging with them in this condition wouldn't be beneficial for me or my husband. Now, I have a loving husband, 4 children, and a dog. We've purchased a spacious home and are living the life my family once dreamed of. If they were aware of our situation, they might try to exploit it, which I couldn't bear. As soon as I learned about this, I went to the local office and arranged for my personal information to be accessible only through formal disclosure requests. I made a conscious effort to keep my distance from them and asked my husband not to engage with them regarding our marriage. Although he seemed disappointed at first, after explaining the situation, he understood and hasn't brought it up since. I hope that once things settle down at my family home and a time for reconciliation arrives, I can rebuild a relationship with my parents and brother.